What is the true power of humility? Well, on this episode of the 11th Thing podcast, I will be discussing this with my special guest, global marketing expert, leadership consultant, entrepreneur, and publisher, Jackie Kimmel. My name is Paul Aladenika, and you are listening to the 11th Thing podcast. Now, on to my special guest for this episode of the 11th Thing podcast. Jackie Kimmel is a global marketing expert, leadership consultant, entrepreneur, and publisher. She founded South Africa's first national teachers magazine in 2007. Over nearly 2 decades, she has worked across publishing, entrepreneurship, digital innovation, and leadership development. Today, Jackie serves as network director at the Young Presidents Organization, a global membership organization for chief executives, presidents, founders, and other senior business leaders with approximately 35,000 members across more than 150 countries. As network director, Jackie facilitates confidential peer learning forums for CEOs, founders, and senior executives, providing opportunities for leaders to share experiences, discuss strategic challenges, and learn from one another. Jackie Kimmel, welcome to this episode of the 11th Thing podcast. It's great to have you on.
It's great to be here, Paul, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm very excited and grateful to be here today.
Excellent, excellent. Jackie, on this episode, we're going to be discussing humility and particularly the place of humility in leadership. When you think about humility as a topic, what comes to mind? I mean, what is humility and what is it not?
Paul, I think humility, especially in leadership development circles, in leadership in the modern age, is often misunderstood. And it can be interpreted as making yourself smaller. It can be interpreted as meekness or, a humble person has a bit of a lack of confidence. Humility is not weakness. It is not meekness. It is not subservience. I really see humility, particularly for leaders, as ego discipline. It's ego under management. It is the ability to see yourself accurately, right-sized, not to become puffed up and inflated by titles and status, but to remain right-sized under pressure. Because let's face it, leadership tests our ego along the journey at almost every step of the way. So for me, it's about remaining right-sized under pressure. Yeah.
And that's an interesting perspective, Jackie, because so often you don't see that sort of presentation, that sort of character presentation amongst leaders. Why do you think that is?
As I say, Paul, I think it's got to do with perception. We live in a culture where a lot of our leaders, for example, in politics, in pop culture, in media, the message is perpetuated that a strong leader, a good leader is powerful. They're visible. They tend to perform certainty, whereas humility often is quieter. It is a little bit slower. It does not perform certainty. A humble leader is someone who has enough inner authority to not be ruled by pride, by praise, by panic, by fear, resentment, loss, all these things that we're faced with as humans in leadership roles. But the message that is so often perpetuated is contrary to that. So it's a little bit of a cutting against the grain of what is culturally seen as, this is what makes a strong leader. Humility. What does that mean? Do I need to serve? We hear the phrase servant leadership brought up so often. And I have been in rooms with folks who denigrate that, because it's a dog-eat-dog world. You've got to go after what you want in the world to get what you want, and it doesn't matter if you step on the next guy to do it. We see that so often with prominent leadership figures. But a humble leader has their ego in check. It's a case of saying, I don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. I don't need to always have all the answers and perform certainty. I don't need to take credit and steal credit from others. I can give credit where credit is due. I don't need to constantly be protecting my self-image. So I'm not allowing fear to rule me by trying to protect my image with those around me and those on my team and those that I work with. I am able to see my strengths, and I am able to see my limitations, and I can hold both. That for me is the essence of what humility is as a leader, and really why in current society there are some misconceptions around it.
Okay, Jackie, so let's take this a little further forward. So, can you speak to the role that humility plays in shaping leadership character and nurturing leadership capability?
Yes, Paul, for me, I actually want to liken leadership character to, let's put it this way, as quality is to a product, character is to a person. So when we look at a product, we are looking for the hallmarks of quality. How durable is that product? Is it going to last? Is it long wearing? Is it aesthetically pleasing, etc., etc. When we look at a good leader, we want to look at that person's character and say, can I trust them? Do they keep their commitments? Do they show up? These are the things we know about good leaders. And humility, for me, is foundational to leadership character because it forms that leader. It really sits underneath everything that person is going to become. And why do I say that? Because if you're a humble leader, you're not inflated by success and by status. You are not collapsed by criticism either. There's the adage that says, those who live by the approval of others will die by their criticism. And a humble leader is not affected by either. Their inner self-governance is so well established that they know people are going to approve, people are going to criticize. It does not change their center of being as a leader. And that for me is why, if you are working on that inner self-governance, that is truly where humility is formed. And it's a case of being able to govern yourself before you can govern others. We see this in history. I'm not a history buff by any means, but we know that the kings of old, before they could ascend to the throne, were required to serve in the court. They were required to, take up roles as pages or squires and serve. Why? That was the character forming. That was the humility school. Before they could rise to govern the room, they had to learn to govern themselves and keep the ego in check. So it was a great way to shape that. And I see in this day and age, perhaps the label is not always clear. This is a humble leader. But when we start to unpack these character traits, it becomes very evident, that you're dealing with someone who is a humble leader, because they're not threatened by truth. They don't surround themselves with yes men at every table. A humble leader is big enough to be able to hold differing perspectives and to entertain the ideas of others quite openly without necessarily accepting them, but to at least hear them. A humble leader is able to admit when they need help. They are able to say, I don't have all the answers. And that is not a sign of weakness. That is a sign of leadership maturity. All of those get built into our character on our leadership journey in its various forms through life. But it really starts with the inner governance. And I see it as a really, the test comes in when you are under pressure. That is when that character gets revealed. So it's easy to lead well when things are going well. But when the pressure is on, that is generally when the ego wants to stand up and say, well, I'm the leader. I'll say when we go and what happens next, But those who have practiced self-governance, and what do I even mean by that? I mean, people might think, well, that's a nice fancy term. What are you getting at, Jackie? Self-governance starts with those small commitments you make to yourself. And very simple things, we've heard it from the Stoics. Your habits actually form your character over time. So what small commitments do you make to yourself, daily practices that you stick to? Those commitments, if you can keep them to yourself, as Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true, then you are able to govern yourself, and you are then better primed to be able to lead others. That's the foundation for me. That's where it starts. And so it's a practice. It's a lifelong journey. These are not new concepts, Paul. I know you've spoken to others on the show, and these are things that we know about leadership. But I think where humility steps in is that people have not often connected the dots to say, well, a self-governed leader is a humble leader. Why is that? Because they're not ruled by ego. That ego is governed. It's ego under management. So yeah, that's a long-winded way to really say that leadership character is shaped by inner governance practices and habits. And that is a hallmark. Someone who does that, it's a hallmark of a humble leader.
Thank you, Jackie. As you were speaking, I think there's just so many nuggets in there. As you were speaking, there was one thing that struck me, and it'd be interesting to just get your thoughts on this as well. To what extent does the experience of failure and mistakes shape humility in the I can see you smiling. I can see you smiling. To what extent does this failure and mistakes shape humility and shape the character of humility and leadership?
If you haven't failed, then you really haven't learned anything yet. Failure is part of our journey to success. And perhaps one of the most challenging things about failure is that it bruises the ego. We all have this human need for self-actualization. Maslow's law of hierarchy. We know that we've got ambitions, and leaders are usually tremendous go-getters. They're driven to fulfill those self-esteem needs and to achieve their goals, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But starting out as a young leader and going for gold and having a setback, failing, life will humble you as you will learn when you're going along, and you have that setback and the ego gets bruised. It's a case of saying, well, what is my tolerance for this? Am I able to dust myself off and pick myself up and learn from it? Turn the different events over in my mind and say, okay, what happened? What can I do better next time? And to use that as momentum and fuel to get up and go again and move forward and get stronger every time. And I mean, it feels, Paul, really like a topic that's been discussed at length. But I think the best leaders, the folks that I've worked with and observed in the rooms that I work in, and just the best leaders in history, they have that golden thread running through their journey. It's not that they've never failed, it's that they failed a tremendous amount. And they've used that to build up a tolerance for failure, really, to be able to have, you know, your ideas rejected, to have people say no to you, to have businesses fail, to have deals fall through and fail, and to keep going, to iterate, to take what worked and to build on that and leave what didn't work behind you and not waste too much time on regret. I think, again, it's a character forming exercise, and it takes grit and it takes guts and it takes resilience, because it's easy in those moments to fall prey to self-pity. Why me? To fall prey to negative thinking. It's easy to spiral. And that's, again, just your own sense of self, your own ego pulling you down. You can choose, you know, are you going to feed that, or are you going to feed forward momentum? And the best leaders, that's a hallmark for them. They're humble enough to say, you know what, this is not the end. Dust myself off. Let's get back in the ring. Let's go again. And that's something I've learned myself in my own life. You know, I've had several career changes. I've had many setbacks in business and in life. And I'm so grateful for every single time that I've failed, because if I had not failed, I would not be the woman standing here today. Those experiences have shaped me and have made me the leader that I am today.
Jackie, that's incredibly powerful and very, very well said. We've talked about on how sometimes leaders might perceive humility as weakness. Talk to me about talk to me about humility as a leadership superpower. How does it enable and engage and strengthen and equip leaders to perform above and do extraordinary things? What is that sort of superpower of leadership that is so little appreciated? Because oftentimes, as you've rightly said, humility is often seen as weakness. But I think what we're doing here is the inverse. We're saying, no. Far from being weakness, this is a superpower. Tell me about how leadership can function as this superpower, and, you know, where you can draw from your own experiences.
So I want to expand on the idea that humility is ego under governance. It's standing strong in your own inner authority. And that is a superpower. It's being able to enter a room, not need to be the loudest person in the room, not need to be the most certain person in the room, and being able to, like I say, take on other people's perspectives, hold them as true, not need to be the center of attention. In my own life, Paul, for a little bit of background, I was used to operating in what I will call here CEO energy, working with global CEOs across a full service agency spanning more than a decade. I was very comfortable leading from the front. And as we said earlier, failure happens, life will humble you. And life flipped the switch for me. And I found myself in a completely different role, where instead of leading from the front and leading in that CEO energy, I've had to learn to lead from behind and lead in a very supporting energy to help other impact makers make their best, put their best foot forward and make their best impressions. And my struggle was an internal one. No surprises there. On every step of our leadership journey, that is usually where the struggle is. It happens in the mind and inside. So inside, I was wrestling with, how do I influence without a title? That takes exceptional humility to influence without a title. It is indeed a superpower, because you learn that humility is actually the key that unlocks the door to that influence. We've heard so many different thought leaders share ideas around how do you influence. And we know that influence is such an integral part of leadership and becoming a good leader. How can you persuade others? How can you move the room? And when you are not approaching the journey from CEO energy, moving the room feels completely different. The strategies are different, and your ego really, more than ever for me, it needed to take a back seat. And what I've learned has been an absolute gift. I'm so grateful for this opportunity because it has sharpened my leadership range tremendously, where I was really leading. If you look at your range as a leader on a spectrum, perhaps I was leading on one side of that spectrum, CEO energy, forward thinking, the front person, get things done, and moving across to the other side of the spectrum, where my role is more leadership without a title now. I have learned to become more humble. It is a case of listening better. It is a case of making room for others, drawing others into the conversation. When I notice in the room that there are certain voices who may not be heard, because we know this is the case often, it's the loudest voice in the room that gets the most airtime. I've learned to help draw in others. I've learned to really venerate the leader, but also influence one-on-one. So I've learned the difference between the one-to-many communication and the one-to-one. And when you are leading without a title, the one-to-one communication becomes so important. But again, from a place of humility, where I cannot come forward with, this is how we're going to do it, there's the solutions, and go make it happen, drawing out the other person, listening, asking better questions, being willing to admit that I don't have all the answers, and saying, well, why don't we bring others in and get their perspectives? It's a totally different energetic feel to leading in that forward thinking CEO energy, and it has made the world of difference. When you are operating on one end of that executive leadership range, you tend to you're being validated. People will often say yes to you and agree with you because of your title, not necessarily because you had the best idea. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you realize, I don't need validation. That's not what it's about. it's not about me, it's about the outcome. So your whole approach changes. And it's in my experience, it has moved the rooms on some big decisions. It has influenced relationships and taken my relationships further than I could ever have anticipated, moving in the other energy. But what I do want to say, coming back to this concept of operating in a range, if you were to say, people talk about executive presence, there's a range on the spectrum. And a humble leader knows when they need to operate in that CEO energy, and they know when they need to operate in a more supporting or a quieter energy. They're sitting back, they're listening more, they're asking questions more, they're paying attention to the detail. They may be the last person in the room to speak. That's always a hallmark of a good leader, is giving everybody else a turn to speak first. And being able to lead well, I think one needs to move on that spectrum. You become adaptable enough to be able to adjust according to what the situation requires of you. And again, that takes humility, because a very egocentric leader never makes room for others, or doesn't never. Well, let's not speak in absolutes, but they tend to rather be, the forward leading the speaker, the loudest voice in the room, because their ego cannot permit them to do it any other way. Self-governed, humble leaders are able to hold both. They have no problem in moving across that range of executive presence and how they show up in the room and with others. And I think that's been my strongest lesson. It's sharpened my ability, but it's also something I witness on a daily basis working with global leaders. It's a hallmark of the best, something that they're able to do. And it moves things forward in every situation with so much less friction and with ease and with stronger relationships.
Excellent response. And it's an interesting segue into my next question, which essentially was just picking up on your point about leadership and influence. There's a causal relationship between influence, confidence, and trust. And I just wanted to get your sense about the difference that humility makes in the context of confidence and trust. I know you've touched on influence as a superpower, but just if you could just expand on that relationship between confidence and trust, because it is so relational, that humility at its best, if it actually helps leaders to be much more influential, then essentially what we're saying is that it is a relational quality, it's a relational characteristic. Can you say more about that, Jackie?
Absolutely, Paul. I think this is the crux of the matter. A humble leader is not afraid to say, I have limited information about this situation. I don't have all the answers. This is what I do know. And to be that forthcoming with their team. We throw the word authenticity around quite a lot. I think it's been overused, but there's something real here where it's a case of, when a humble leader who is not protecting their image and their ego is able to be authentic with their team, with their stakeholders, people pick up on that. They perceive congruence, and it builds trust. And you're talking about the relational element. We know that the highest performing teams are teams where trust is high. I know there's so many analogies for this, but years ago in a different role, I worked with a leader who I had a very, very good relationship with, just a very authentic person, happy to admit when he didn't have the answers, when he didn't know, when he needed help. And it built, rather than lowering my respect for him or seeing that as a weakness, I really saw that as a strength. It built such trust. I would have gone to war for that man, honestly. And some days it did feel like it. We were in the trenches, proverbially speaking, every day. And he got more out of his team than was expected. Everyone on that team went above and beyond. Why? Because he was humble enough and real enough to not be performing a role. He was able to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't need all the credit. You know, there's a saying that goes, a good leader should make every success a we and every failure a me. And again, that just is such a wonderful way for me to describe a humble leader. That's exactly what a humble leader will do. They will take accountability. They're not afraid. They're not trying to apportion blame when things go wrong. And when things go right, they give credit to the team. Again, like I say, these are things in leadership that are not new ideas, but they are hallmarks of humility. And I think, again, that's where the misconception comes in. We don't tie that in as a hallmark to a humble leader, but it really is, because you have to have your ego in check to behave that way. And when you do, the results with your team and the people around you are exponential. I've seen it with my own teams. I've had a global agency. I've had a team of, large teams of people under my employment in the past. And that has been something that I've seen makes a world of difference, because we can sense when a leader is not being 100% authentic in the way that they're showing up.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I mean, that kind of leads us really logically to this sort of endpoint, which is, can you say something about humility as a leadership brand? I mean, you've set the scene here really, really effectively, describing some of the different characteristics of humility. But can you now sort of tie this up now and just give your thoughts on humility as a leadership brand, and why leaders should make a conscious effort to make it their brand?
Yes, Paul, I think before we even go there, we need to consider what is a brand. Because if you want to say humility is my leadership brand, and you're slapping a slogan on yourself and saying, well, this is my label, it can be a little bit absurd and self-congratulatory. But I think if we consider that a brand is the pattern that people come to expect from a leader, how you show up, a pattern, a set of behaviors for that leader, then by all means, humility can become your leadership brand. It can become what you are known for. And we know I come from the world of marketing and branding before this, and we know that your brand is not what you say you are, it's what other people say you are. So 100% humility can be, and I strongly recommend you make humility your leadership brand, in that if you can show up and, what people believe about you becomes, that people are able to say, I can trust her. I can believe her when she says X, Y, and Z. Or, another characteristic for a humble leader, someone whose leadership brand is humility. He's not going to take the credit for my work. I can disagree with him, or I can challenge him without being punished for it. That's a hallmark of a humble leader. I can talk to him or her about this and it will not be made about them. It will be about the outcome. Those are hallmarks of humble leaders. And I think those are patterns that I would like to be known for as a leader. And to me, that is the essence of a humble leader, and therefore not something that, we should see as making yourself smaller than, being subservient, being weak or meek. And there's something else I'd like to touch on that we haven't yet spoken about, which is false humility. We actually see that a lot in leadership circles because, let's face it, leaders are typically very goal-orientated, driven, A-type personalities, right? Nothing wrong with that. But the minute it comes to receiving praise and being congratulated for your achievements, there's a tendency in some of us to want to shy away from it or push it away or diminish it in the sense that we'll say, oh, no, it was nothing. Anyone could have done that. Or it wasn't, it wasn't me, it was the team. And to push it back on your team completely, as if it would be wrong or a moral failure to accept the congratulations. That is not humility. Anytime that you are pushing praise away for fear of coming across as being puffed up or too full of yourself, or you're managing perception, that is actually false humility. A truly humble leader is able to actually take that on board and say, thank you. I'm very proud of that project. The team worked very hard on it, and it's a wonderful success for us. That's true humility. And again, that takes ego management. It turns the entire concept really of humility on its head when it comes to leadership, because you have to be secure in the knowledge that you might take that and others may judge you and criticize you. The criticism may come, that for whatever reason, people are going to make their assumptions, but that's more about what they're projecting than you. A humble leader, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, they are pretty steady on the inside. Their inner governance is solid. They know what their strengths are. They know what their limitations are. They're able to hold both. And they're not going to act in false humility when they receive acknowledgement and recognition for their successes. So that's something else I wanted to just put in there as part of that leadership brand. Make it a habit. Give yourself permission to say, yes, thank you. I really appreciate that feedback. That was a challenging project, and the team and I are proud of what we've achieved, because that actually shows more humility than pushing it down and oh no, it was nothing, and really it's no big deal. The more you say things like that, the more inclined the other person, of course, is to continue with the praise. No, but really, it was, and that just shows that you're enjoying getting your ego stroked. That's why it's false humility. So, what do you want to, at the end of the day, I'd say, what do you want to be known for? We often talk about legacy and the mark that leaders leave on their teams, the projects they work on, the businesses, the things they build. It's often a thought in a leader's mind. They want to make an impact. They want to make a difference in the world. I would say, when it comes to your leadership brand, what do you want to be known for? How do you want to make other people feel? Another quote that's done the rounds, that's very popular, is the Maya Angelou quote about people will forget what you said and did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. For me, as a leader with a humility leadership brand, I want to be remembered for making other people feel heard, seen, included, safe to speak up and share ideas. That doesn't mean we'll never disagree. It doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but it does mean that there will be that human connection and that trust. I will not allow my ego to rule the room. And so I want to challenge other leaders listening to this who are on your leadership journey, whether it's at the beginning of your leadership journey, where, you know, there's a, as a young leader, there's a tendency to want to overcompensate. You step into a new role and you want to prove that you're worthy of the title. You want people to really not see you as weak. So you tend to overperform certainty, for example, and you don't want to ever admit that you made a mistake or that you don't have the full picture and all the information necessary. I would say practice that humility. It's not going to make you look weaker. It's going to make you look a heck of a lot stronger. And to leaders who are more mature on their journey, again, I want to say, push the boundaries of your own comfort zone. Ask yourself the question, am I challenging this idea in the room because of the outcome, or am I challenging it because I can, because I'm in the leadership role? Start asking yourself better questions and making more room for humility. It is transformational.
Excellent. Jackie, thank you so much for your insights and perspectives, especially on that last point about, humility as a leadership brand. You're so right. Your brand is what's reflected back to you. Your image is what you project outwards. And your point about false humility is absolutely right. Performative humility is not humility at all. But so thank you so much for that. Jackie, can you just summarize just in three quick points what you want to share with our audience in terms of the sort of the key takeaways?
Certainly, Paul. Humility is not weakness, not self-diminishment or self-erasure. It's not disappearing in the room. It is governed strength. Humility is showing up with your ego under management, and it is an inner authority that gives you the ability to see yourself more accurately as a leader. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is a superpower for you on your leadership journey if applied correctly. You will learn as a humble leader to be able to perform and operate on a spectrum, on a range. Your executive presence will be able to move from being very front-facing and visible and decisive and fast-paced to being able to move to a slower, more deliberate, more thoughtful, quieter pace in the room, and to make space for all the interactions in between. It will also strengthen your relationships. And that's the third take, really, where is humility as a leader feeds leadership capability and relationships, trust. It's foundational to building trust with those in your circle of influence. So if you really want to tap into a hidden strength, start looking into what can I do to function and show up as a more humble leader. It will not denigrate you. In fact, it will elevate you.
That's excellent. Brilliant summary. Jackie, just in terms of the closing moments here, I just really wanted to give you the opportunity to say a little bit about what you do and your work and your passions and your interests. Tell our listeners about Jackie Kimmel.
I appreciate that, Paul. I'm a teacher, trained teacher by profession, and have always had an entrepreneurial spirit. launched a magazine for teachers that I sold nationally in South Africa, as well as in Australia and New Zealand. That propelled me into marketing, had a marketing agency for more than a decade, spanning clients from London, Dubai to Malaysia, and experienced a fair amount of success with that. I experienced the bitter taste of failure, which I alluded to earlier in our chat, and lost the business during COVID, as so many people did. But it was a wonderful school of learning for me. And I really do see it as a gift, a time of transformation, being able to reinvent myself. I was always involved with speaking and training, a lot of online training, and a lot of, I would say, initiatives that help people connect, online community building, networking. And that's what launched me into my current role. I now work at the largest leadership organization in the world, and I have the privilege of supporting global impact makers, Fortune 500 CEOs from 147 countries around the world, in their leadership journeys. I run the rooms where these decisions get made on a daily basis. And so I get to see firsthand some of the different facets of what we've spoken about, how different people show up, and, you know, what moves things forward and what slows them down. And it's been a wonderful learning ground and a wonderful lesson in humility for me. The next thing I'm excited about is continuing to develop a personal brand as Jackie Reads the Room. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Threads, on X, on LinkedIn, all the social platforms. That's a background to my previous life as a marketing agency owner. I do have a presence on all the platforms. And I am really not selling anything. I am not going to push a course on you. I am in this space unpacking and examining and exploring many of the themes that we covered in today's conversation. How to read the room. What does the best leadership in the world look like? How do they show up in the room? What's different? How does these are all soft skills, right? And we talk about them, but I'm really observing patterns and sharing my observations about what's working and what's not. In the pipeline, there may be a book, because one of the themes that I really want to consider expanding on is this idea of executive presence operating on a spectrum and a range, and what that looks like. So that, stay tuned for that. That is to come in time ahead. But thank you very much for the opportunity to unpack some of this and to explore a topic that is not often covered in leadership development and leadership education circles. I really appreciate it, Paul, and I am excited about what you're doing and the platform that you're building here. Thank you for giving voices to others and helping to share diverse perspectives.
Jackie Kimmel, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the 11th Thing podcast.
Thank you, Paul. I hope to see you again.
Finally, before I sign off, can I ask that listeners please share this podcast across your social networks? Please also check out previous episodes of the 11th Thing podcast. And if you want to know more about the issues being covered in this series, head over to Believenomics on YouTube and TikTok for a sneak peek.